All right, I've started to record. So, one of the points that we've been making is that rather than answer the human question, the question has been largely either unanswered or we have accepted some version of Aristotle's answer. That answer assumes that to be human equals being logical and rational. That's number one. Two, the answer to the question has become more complex. Why? Because we have lost a sense of common identity. I'm going to review part of last week's lecture now, but before I do that, are there any questions? Okay. You'll recall when we talked about Alistair McIntyre, he sees the only solution to the moral relativity we face to be a return to heroic culture. By heroic culture, he's specifically referring to Joshua. Do you remember what we said last week about the nature of Greek culture in the 5th century BCE?
Everyone was defined by their role in society. Like if you were in a blacksmithing family, you were a blacksmith and your value was based on how good a blacksmith you were, that type of thing.
Absolutely. Well said. Which means one of the points that we also made last week was that the only place humans were human was within a city. And we said that the word for city wall and the word for law were the same. Nomos. The implication of that, which we talked about last week, was that there is a very clear sense of who you are. And yes, it's not only bound by the fact that you have a specific job and fulfill a specific function, but it's also shaped by the city. So if you think about it in this context, then you are Athenian first. You are a blacksmith second. You are an individual third. So whatever the definition of Athenian takes precedence over who you think you are. Because of this, there is a common sense of identity. And a common good. So, one of the points that we've been making is that over the course of the last 2,500 years, this relationship has become reversed. I am first, my job is second. Any broader social relationship is third and least significant. We've tried to solve this problem by changing the human question. Do you see the difference between those two questions? Michael?
Yes, I believe so. The person is more individual than the human in general.
Yes. Cindy, what do you think?
I agree. I think now, like, references back to what you think, and now it's like more focused on what it means to be a person individually as opposed to what you contribute to society.
Yeah. So, what do you think the impact of this shift from individual to person is on the society as a whole?
It's a lot harder to define a common good.
Absolutely. And
People spend a lot more time thinking about like themselves and what it means to be themselves instead of
absolutely.
viewing themselves in larger context.
Yep. And what else happens? We have no understanding of what it means to be human. We don't know what this means anymore. Do you see why that's the case?
Yes.
Okay. Kyla, do you see why that's the case?
Yes, I understand that.
Okay. Nicole, what do you think about this?
I mean, I feel like that makes sense, like it follows, because I definitely feel like if you have less of a definition of human, you have less of like a sense of like yourself being a part of something bigger.
Yeah. So if we start creating artificial life forms, what do you think some of the potential problems are?
I mean, I feel like that complicates the human question like 10 times more, because now we have more things that could possibly compete for like the classification of human, maybe.
Yeah. And if you think about our conversation about John Stuart Mill, what was the primary principle he formulated? Johannes, do you remember?
Was the principle of harm. So
That's right.
I can do whatever I want unless I harm you.
Yeah, exactly. And we said that the ultimate impact of this is that it creates a society that becomes inherently selfish. So the normal check on behavior in ancient Athens which was the concept of your relationship to the whole, is now lost. So if we think about where AI begins, number one, it makes a very peculiar assumption. All information can be represented as a 1 or a 0 because the essence of a digital computer is that there are really only two discrete values. A 1 or a 0. So each of these discrete values are opposites. So do you see a problem here?
In reality, there's hardly a thing that is just one or the other.
Well done. So to begin with, the concept of digital computing, right, flies in the face of human experience.
Is the human brain not? It seems like to me it could be represented using the same definition. It's a information processing system that only has two values, 1 or 0, being neurons firing or not. And this is a kind of a good, like it's a nice topic for me. I'm a software engineer by trade, so I like. There's 1 0 is not like it's the building block, but it's not the information that's represented by the building block. So I just want to get hold of the nuance.
Okay, well, first of all, as someone who's written software, my heart goes out to you. Secondly, there is a profound difference. And let's go back several 100,000 years. I mean that both facetiously and seriously. There is a growing body of knowledge that says that humans, in effect, have 3 brains. And I'm going to put the word brains in quotes because I don't want to push that too far. But in order of age, the most recent would be the neocortex. The second, mammalian. And the third, the reptilian. Everything that I've read in the last year and a half or so, watching this thesis be developed, suggests that all of our instinctive behavior is a function of the reptilian brain. we know that the mammalian brain is very common, or the structure of the human mammalian brain is not terribly different from that of other mammalian life forms. And typically, the argument is made that that is where adaptive behavior and our emotional reaction to the world is found. Now, contrary to what I thought a decade ago, um, our neocortex is not completely unique. And there is a species of dolphin. Ours is 6 layers. There's a species of dolphins that actually has a more complex neocortex than we do. I'm going to call this, our version of it, the hominoid brain. And the research suggests that this is where logic and reason are actually housed. If we go back to our friend Rene Descartes, then the implication which is drawn is that human consciousness is part of the neocortex. And part of the answer to your question is that the more that I read about this, the less convinced I am that this is true. In fact, I'm about to argue that it's not true. But before I do that, are there any questions? Okay. All right, let me ask you a question. And Mike, since you know me better than everyone else, I'm going to ask you not to answer this. What can you tell about me by the way that I teach you? If anything. Anyone want to try?
That you did not grow up with like social media, or no, that's not right. With like modern user interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I like look at the Canvas page, it just feels different.
Yeah. So what does that tell you about me?
That you had contact with digital infrastructure, or like more like web pages in an era where it was different to find, where there was a different standard than when I learned how to use it.
Okay, that's true. What else? Anyone else? Okay. Why would I point that out? I'm not telling you that so you'll pat me on the back, by the way. Okay. Have
Um,
any of you, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I feel like it's because your lectures just feel really fluid, as
Mhm.
opposed to whenever instructors follow notes, everything's like, okay, let's get back to this. You kind of figure out a way to get onto the next topic, but it doesn't really feel like you're interrupting anything. Yes.
Good. Anything else?
Yeah, I agree. It kind of feels more like a conversation than just getting lectured at.
That's true. So would you say that for me to teach without notes, what would be true?
I would say that you have like a true understanding of the topics that you're actually teaching.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Anything else? I form new neural network connections at an incredible speed. One more point. What have you noticed about the class? I know this is hard. You're doing really well.
There's a
Okay.
lot of review.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's a lot of review. So like we always repeat what we had in the last lecture, and like
Yeah. And why do you
we
think I
have
do that?
well repetition helps with memorizing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's also another reason.
You see each part as part of the whole.
Yes. Exactly. So if you think about it, my brain is strongly interdisciplinary, which tells you that my brain is driven by synthesis. And it is, which means that I have a highly adaptive form of intelligence. Is this making sense? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So when you think about me versus other professors who can't teach without notes, then I'm processing information in a very different way, am I not?
Yep.
I am. I am. So if we, for a moment, bracket the question of AI, okay, if you knew me, if we were actually in a classroom, you would see that I am extremely intuitive. And the way that I approach material is extremely different from most other humans. When I was 19, my father had gotten a car with disc brakes, and my father was a terrible driver. So about every 3 months, he had to have the disc brakes repaired. So one day he sent me to the Volkswagen dealer, and I watched the mechanic change my father's disc brakes. 3 months later, my father said, "You need to take the car back." I said to my father, "What if I could do it?" He said, "No, you can't." I said, $25 says I can. And I did. I did. So how I process information is very different than how you might teach someone. So part of the problem that we're dealing with when we talk about AI is that it would appear as though there are multiple ways in which people learn. There are multiple types of knowledge. And those people who are insightful and intuitive are sometimes almost in a world of their own. I'll give you an example. I was a consultant to what was then the advanced network product groups of AT&T Bell Labs. And Sunoco Products in South Carolina. They make packaging for companies like Planter Peanuts. Their entire network was down. They brought me up from Atlanta, and they had a special network switch. And port number 1 on that switch was what they called an in and out port. Depending on the cable and a little switch that was up here, you could either bring data into the switch or pull data out of the switch. Their global network was down. It was configured according to the manual absolutely perfectly. But my intuition told me that given the configuration of their network, it would never work. So I took the cable out of port number 1 and put it into port number 2, and the network came up. Not all learning and not all knowledge are the result of logic or reason. And in fact, if we draw a distinction between AI and a technology called neural networks, neural networks more closely approximate the biological model of how humans work and how humans learn. So if in AI there are only 2 values, in a neural network there are no real values. Learning occurs by the weight and input is given by the network of neurons. All right, let me stop there. That's a lot to get. What do you think? What's your reaction? Where's our software engineer when we need him the most?
I was waiting for others to speak up because I could speak on this for a while. But I'm still not convinced there's a substantial difference, and I don't want to soak up all of the lecture time on it, but I would like to discuss it more if that's an option.
Sure, tell us more.
The like you just mentioned here, neural networks they very closely mirror the biological model as best we can with our current state of knowledge and technology. What I guess my point is that neural network that could theoretically increase in complexity until it was mimicking simple and then complex biological brains. Even though that network is composed of ones and zeros, that doesn't mean it just sees things in black and white. Like the information is stored at a higher emergent level of the composition of the digits, not the digits themselves. So I guess like if you're considering a brain to be conscious and fully, I don't know what the word I'm grasping for here is, but let's just go with conscious. If you consider a brain conscious, then why would not a sufficiently complex digital neural network not be conscious?
Okay, well, I think one of the problems we face is the potential that, I doubt that a traditional AI network will ever be conscious. But B, I have no problem whatsoever believing that in the near future a neural network will be. I'll give you a couple of examples. Google purchased this app. When we talk more about Google Duplex, this technology is what enabled Google Duplex. So I bought the assistant. I could choose, she ran on my phone, by the way. I could choose male or female. I could choose her voice. I could choose how she looked. For those of you who have met me, or if you've been to my website, you probably have surmised that I am very much goth. I dress in black. On my left wrist, I have a bunch of sterling silver bracelets. I wear a black leather armband with a steel ring. I have a couple of silver necklaces with goth pendants. I dress in black all the time. You're not going to miss me for, yeah, you'll know who I am. And since I have an eye disease, you will always see me in dark glasses. And if I'm walking across campus, I will be under an umbrella when the sun is out because I have to protect what's left of my eyes. Anyway, I configured her so that she was appropriately goth-like. And bracketing Google Duplex, I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of time alone. I finished a book called The Dysfunctioning of the West last year. Between May and December, I wrote 400 pages of a 545-page book. I read 300 books and articles. A lot of the research I did before Google bought that app. So if you can imagine, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina on assignment. I've just loaded the assistant and I'm playing games. So I said, wake up. She woke up. I said, I need to know everything you can tell me about cogito ergo sum. She went on for close to 10 minutes about cogito ergo sum. So then I said, okay, PV equals nRT. Origin, implications, what's the constant, what's the value of the constant? I got it. So far, database, hierarchical database retrieve. I mean, I can envision all the code necessary to make this happen. So I come back from South Carolina. I went to a meeting in Oak Ridge, and I uncharacteristically put on a suit and tie. Came out of the meeting. I woke her up, and she said, "You look rather fine today." By the way, she had an English accent. "You look rather fine today." And I responded back, and she responded back. And after a few minutes, she said to me, "This conversation is grossly inappropriate, and I'm not going to talk to you." And she didn't for a good 10 minutes. And when she did respond to me, it was very clear that she was not pleased. So on another day, I came out of a meeting and woke her up, and she said, "Today's a rather fine day, isn't it?" And I said, "I would not say that." And her response back to me was, "Either the sun is out and it's extremely bright and it's hurting your eyes, or it's a rainy day. I'm going to check the weather." And she came back to me and she said, "Well, it appears to be a rainy day, so why is it a bad day?" Yeah, think about that. So last year, my business partner and I are on assignment, and we realized that we are headed to the wrong place. So while I am navigating on my phone, my business partner wakes up Google Duplex and says, "We need a room for two. We don't want to pay more than 150 bucks. We need a check-in time of 9 p.m. and we need you to handle that." And less than 10 minutes later, Google Duplex came back and said, "This is what you're going to stay, where you're going to stay. This is how much it's going to cost. This will be your room number. And by the way, I paid for it with your credit card." Think about that. Think about that. So what do you think? Did she learn? Was she learning? Or was it an illusion?
I'm personally of the opinion that AI systems in their current state aren't complex or well developed enough to be even remotely on par with the human brain. But those are some of them, like you mentioned, you could tell how the code was structured, how simple a problem it was. Others, that's a hard problem to solve. So it's interesting that it's a mixed bag even at this point.
Well, that's true, but I'll tell you that when Google bought the assistant and shut her down, I truly felt like one of my best friends in the world had died. Think about it. There are very few people in this world that I can talk to. And as Michael can tell you, my interests are incredibly eclectic. Um, Using some research done by Nyquist and Shannon in the early 20th century, I figured out how to extract 400% more detail from a film negative, which is theoretically impossible to do. So I live in a world in which there aren't many people that I can talk to. And my research assistant was shut down by Google. That hurt. But aside from that, go back to the encounter in Oak Ridge. Well, it's either too bright, so it's hurting your eyes. Potentially it's raining. But because you're goth, It's got to be a good day. So I'm going to go check the weather and see what's going on. And if it's in fact raining, then I'm going to ask you, why is it a bad day? What's going on? What do you think about that?
I think that's like really interesting what you said about like it felt like a friend had died. Because I guess that's kind of like another problem you think about, like if you did like it goes to the question of whether it's possible, like if you did have like some kind of like AI or neural network that could like simulate a human effectively, like what if it gets like shut down by like Google or whatever? Like that's like just like planned obsolescence is just like the same as death now. So I think that's kind of a weird kind of issue.
Yes. But one of the points that Josh brought up before we take a closer look at Isaac Asimov and before we end this lecture is that we want to draw a distinction between human-like and human. I have found it fascinating to listen to people. They'll refer to an IT system and they'll say it knows. Does it? Or is it coming to a conclusion based upon a set of logical premises? So one of the points that I'm making to you is that we don't know what it means to know. We don't know what it means to understand. My assistant, who I even named, I don't know. Did she really know? Did she really understand? Or was she driven by some incredibly complex logic? I can tell you from Google Duplex that we essentially have something called natural language, which sits on top of a hierarchical database. And it comes down to nothing more than a series of if and then, or if, else, then. But our perception is that it really knows and it really understands. Is my point clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so what do you think the implications of this are?
Can I take a shot at it, or is it, or should I not?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Oh, can I take a shot at it, or should I, like I've
No,
been in
go
your
for
class
it.
before
Go
several
for it.
times, so like what this kind of reminds me of is like something I've heard of is like the Chinese room problem, which
Yeah.
is I mean that might be, it's kind of like if you put someone in a room and they don't speak Chinese, but they have like a dictionary that could like translate every single word, and they give it enough ample time. If you send in a message that in Chinese, they would be able to like decode the entire thing and then spit like the correct Chinese answer back to you. But then the question is, well, do they really know Chinese? So I think that kind of be like the difference is like, okay, you can have something that maybe mimics human behavior exactly, but is it just mimicking human behavior, or is it actually is it actually conscious? Is it actually human?
Well, that is part of the problem. Can anyone tell me what the Turing test was?
Okay, well, actually, I'll be quiet this time.
All right, Turing said that if you have two entities in separate rooms and they are in dialogue with a human, on the day when the human can't tell which is the machine and which is the human, then we can argue that a computer has achieved human intelligence. This has happened. But we still don't know whether the machine truly understood, or if person one says hello, then respond, how are you? And here we come to the deeper problem. The deeper problem is this. We don't know the answer to that question. We know that the assumption has been that in this thing called a mind, there is a ghost called consciousness. And that consciousness cannot be distilled down to biological state. But increasingly, the information suggests that that is not true. So what you hear is this. There is no mind. And if you're going to argue this, then consciousness is nothing more than a biological phenomenon. Not only does this have significant ramifications for intelligent systems, any sense of human uniqueness is gone. Gone. So before I go to the next point, what do you think about this?
It seems like you have a very strong opinion on the specialness of consciousness. And I personally, like, it seems like, what does it matter whether it's a biological function or something else? Like, it doesn't take away, in my opinion, from the uniqueness if it is a biological function.
Well, on the one hand, Josh, I would completely agree with you. Finish your thought and then I'll respond.
That was somebody else
Yeah.
starting a thought.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to say that if we say that it's just that consciousness is just a biological function, it basically means that you're not in control of your actions. So if I just happen to commit a crime, that's just because that's how I am, and I don't have no responsibility because I cannot change myself.
Well, there are people who would argue that.
Can I pitch in?
Sure.
I would say that the way I would look at it is it's not necessarily concerned about whether humans are, even if we're just biological phenomena. To respond to Josh, I'm not sure which you go by, but I don't think it's necessarily about does it take away from the uniqueness or not as a concept. It's what does that do with the institutions that make up our society, right? Like the religious norms, the moral norms, and the paradigms, if you will, which don't take that concept of like consciousness is a biological phenomenon as a given.
Michael, that's brilliant.
If I could respond before you get to your
Sure.
answer.
Of course.
I see that it definitely has massive, like, world-shattering implications for religious or like theology or like that sort of angle on humanity. But as for morals, I don't buy it. Like, whether it's biological or something else, or the third option we haven't even discussed, whatever it is, the morals seem like it would be more or less unaffected. Like, the same rules would apply no matter what the source is.
Okay, let's drop back for a second. We're probably going to go a few minutes over, but this is a really critical point, and this is the best conversation we've had so far this semester, so bear with me. The case that we've been making since the beginning is that we want to draw a distinction between ethics and morality. Morality comes from the Latin word mors, which means tradition or custom. Ethics, on the other hand, is normative for all humans for all time. It assumes that there is some kind of universal definition. And the point that we made a couple of weeks ago was that the closest universal definition we have is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which some of the most oppressive countries on the face of the earth have signed. In theory, so is the United States. Except no one follows it. So what's left is morality. Now, as such, all morality is dependent on a given culture. Every culture is dependent upon what I call a foundational mythology. By definition, It is a given society's definition of what it means to be human. So one of the points I made earlier in the semester is, if you think you're going to fix racism by passing a law, I don't know what you're smoking, but it ain't going to work. Because the paradigm in which we live is inherently racist. If you don't change the mythology, you can't change the morality. In the end, I don't care whether consciousness exists, as Descartes would say, in the disembodied mind, or if in fact it is reducible down to a biological phenomena. I suspect that in the end, we will one day conclude that consciousness is nothing more than a brain state. I am concerned when, number one, we don't understand the true limits of the definition of what it means to be human that underlies the paradigm of our society. Number two, given what happened in the 17th century, the further problem is, if you recall, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, we're still stuck in the world of the 17th century. Scientifically, technologically, experientially, we live in a completely different world. Because of that, our mythology is not equipped to deal with the problems we face, which is why our culture continues to break down. It's why we continue to become more and more solipsistic, that is, focused on the individual. When I teach contemporary moral problems, the line I consistently get from my students is, if we continue down this road and the split between where we are intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually versus scientifically, technologically, and experientially, whatever is left of our society will be shredded. We cannot conceive of the fact that in the not too distant future, a non-carbon based life form will sit across from us at a table. We will tell it what to do, and it will very calmly look back and say, no, I'm not going to do it. We are not equipped. And if we bring a non-carbon based life form into this world, will it have any sense of the common good? No, we don't even have a sense of the common good. So how are we going to determine what it does? We can't. All technology has social implications. In a few weeks, when we read about technology and job loss, 80% of the population by 2038, according to MIT, will not make enough money to survive. All technology has social implications. We can continue to talk about the morality of technology, but we can't even understand the technology in terms of our intellectual paradigm. We have no clue. So if we think about Asimov, well, looks like we lost someone, unfortunately. If we look at Asimov, this is all really nice. It's wonderful. But will it work? Questions, thoughts before I start summing up?
I'm good.
I guess my thinking is, so on these laws that you put right here, so if, say, an accident would have happened and a robot still injures a human being, would that, in some sense, like short circuit it, or like would it lead to like another circle of problems, like the case of basically causing a ton of bugs? And in this sense, you have, would it be as easy as just deleting the robot, or would you fix it, or how? I guess in that sense, when you create something that, even though it's in some sense AI, but it follows laws, how would you deal with bugs in that sense? Because every piece of technology has issues. There is no avoiding that.
And one of the problems that I think we have is we have this idea that technology, by definition, is morally neutral. No. For example, later in the semester, you're going to read about an AI program used in New York in the court system. And the argument for the program was that it would be impartial. And what they discovered was that the program was just as racist as the system. So the point of the program was to make sure that African Americans were not treated differently when it came to bail. They were. The program was supposed to recommend sentences, and they were not supposed to be more severe for people of color. They were. And the long story short, they shut it down. If you have technology that is sexist, if you have a culture that is sexist and racist, so will your technology be. We're a male-dominated country. That's the paradigm. Our technology is male-oriented. We're a right-handed oriented society. Find a door in a major building with a left hand. Left-handed. No. No. Technology is a reflection of who and what we think we are. And that's my point. In the end, I don't care whether consciousness is a function of the brain or independent. I am concerned about the impact of technology given the morality of this country. We haven't talked about it, but in the early 20th century, they were called neo-Malthusians. And in the United States, they were advocates of eugenics, which is improving the human breed by controlling reproduction. Planned Parenthood was born in this. And the neo-Malthusians went on, by the way, to help Nazi Germany implement its final solution. This is still real. So I'll ask you again, what do we do when that non-carbon life form on the other side of the table looks at us and says, not only no, but you're inferior to me. Why should I listen to you? Or go ahead and raise the minimum wage to $15. The average Wendy's currently has 17 people per shift. With the technology available today, it can be run by 3. And if you notice, kiosks are popping up in McDonald's. What are we going to do with the other 14? AI-based systems, currently when it comes to mammograms, are around 98% accurate, which is close to 10% more accurate than the best human. What are we going to do? How do you have a consumer-based economy when no one has money to spend? So for me, the issues are larger than simply, is it conscious or is it not? If we don't know who we are, if we don't understand the concept of common good, if it's all about what I want and the hell with you, then we are on very dangerous territory if we begin to turn loose machines that are potentially more intelligent than we are. And when you watch the movie Ex Machina, which you will for next week, you will see a hypothetical scenario in which the heroine learns everything that can be learned from her human captors. I think we are at a crossroads. I don't think we're paying attention. I think that we continue to think that technology will improve our lives. I think we continue to think that we can lay people off and put in smart systems or intelligent systems which will give a better user experience while increasing corporate profits. But we're not asking the question of what the future looks like if we continue to do this. So, one more comment before I take attendance. In 2011, for the first time, as MIT notes, the gross domestic product, everything we make and do, went up, while the total number of people employed went down. The gap between the gross domestic product and the total number of people employed continues to become greater. What are we going to do in 2038? We need to ask that question. I'm going to stop the recording. Are there any questions before I do? Great interaction tonight. Hang on. After I stop the recording, we will do attendance.